Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, would you be comfortable sharing with us the name of the hotel you stayed in last night?
What all these companies have in common is they collect your personal information and then resell or share it with others.
No.
Mark Zuckerberg pledged himself a free speech champion. Yet I witnessed Meta work hand in glove with the Chinese Communist Party to construct and test custom-built censorship tools that silenced and censored their critics. I watched as executives decided to provide the Chinese Communist Party with access to Meta user data, including that of Americans. Meta built a physical pipeline connecting the United States and China. Meta executives ignored warnings that this would provide backdoor access to the Chinese Communist Party, allowing them to intercept the personal data and private messages of American citizens.
If you've messaged anybody this week, would you share with us the names of the people you've messaged?
Senator, no, I would probably not choose to do that publicly here.
I think that may be what this is all about. Your right to privacy, the limits of your right to privacy, and how much you give away in modern America in the name of, quote, connecting people around the world.
Imagine this. You take your car to the shop to get worked on, to get routine maintenance. You get an oil change, you get your tire rotation, wheel balancing, wheel alignment, and after nearly 3 hours of waiting for your car to be serviced, the mechanic enters the customer waiting area with this disturbed look on his face, and he has something in his hands. And this is when he says, "Excuse me, I found this GPS tracker under your vehicle. It looks like it was sitting there, and I think you should know about this." This actually happened in 2023 to the current mayor of Nevada, Hillary Sheev. Someone had hired a private investigator to spy on her. They snuck onto her property with no warrant, no warning, and put this GPS tracker on her car and then tracked her movements day and night. Just full-on espionage in small-town America. Now here's where it gets absurd. Hillary got the GPS tracker analyzed by law enforcement, and she was able to take that data to identify who owned it, and in this case, it was owned by the private investigator named David McNeely, and she filed a civil lawsuit against David and his client who hired him to spy on her. But once the case reached the Nevada District Court, David McNeely refused to reveal the name of his client, saying that it's a protected trade secret under Nevada state law. And luckily, the district court ruled against him and said that he must reveal the name of his client immediately. David appealed this decision to the Nevada State Supreme Court, and they also rejected his claim that it was a protected trade secret, right? And at this point, the John Doe, the person who hired the private investigator to spy on the mayor, they were also making a claim that it was their First Amendment right to spy, or it was a political activity to track the whereabouts of the mayor. Like, you can't be serious. Like, since when did spying on someone, trespassing on their property, and tracking their movements become protected free speech? And this is like saying that breaking into the U.S. Capitol is an act of free speech and patriotism, and that those who do this are worthy of a presidential pardon. And oh, it actually happened. President Trump actually pardoned 1,500 people who were charged with the January 6th Capitol riot. But back to the story. Once the Nevada State Supreme Court ruled that this private investigator had to give up the name of his client, surprise, surprise, they appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court and filed an emergency petition asking for the court to block this ruling to keep the private investigator from giving up the identity of John Doe, the person who hired him to spy on the mayor. And that's where this case stands today. So hopefully in the near future, we'll get some closure on who this person is who hired the private investigator to spy on this citizen, right? Now, let me ask you this. If we're horrified when someone spies on us, why aren't we horrified when we let corporations do it every day? I'm gonna let you sit and think about that. I mean, let's be real. Almost everyone has a smartphone. We're constantly online. We're sharing photos, locations. We're checking in. And in the process, we're leaving behind a very valuable digital trail that's more valuable than gold. In this episode, I'm going to walk you through some real life stories that show just how dangerous our digital choices can be and what you can do to stop being your own spy. Welcome to episode 3 of the Tye Breaker Pod. I'm your host, Tye, and we're about to get into this. Let me tell you a story that sounds like it came out of a thriller novel, but it's 100% real. The main character is Zachary McCoy, just a regular guy living in Florida. He wasn't a criminal, he wasn't a hacker, he wasn't even near a police station. He was just a cyclist. He also liked to track his bike rides using an app called Runkeeper, which happened to rely on Google Maps to operate. And one day, there was a burglary in his neighborhood, and the police didn't have a suspect. So what did? They got a warrant from the judge and issued that warrant to Google, demanding that they turn over the location data of any device that was in a specific geographic area. This is called a geofence. So any device that was within that geofence within a certain amount of time, the police wanted Google to turn over their identities. And guess who got caught up in that area of the geofence? My man, Zachary McCoy. That's right, Zachary. And he was on this list because he rode by the house on his normal bike route 3 times. 3 times was all it took for him to become a suspect. He didn't know he was under investigation. He didn't know Google was ordered to turn over his data to law enforcement. And by the time he got an email from Google informing him that his data was turned over to law enforcement, the deed had already been done for quite some time. So at this point, Zachary is in a situation where he has to prove his innocence, right? So facing serious jail time, he did what most normal people in their right mind would do. He hired a lawyer, and this costed him thousands of dollars. And on top of this, his Google account got locked. And even after the case was dropped and it became clear that Zachary had nothing to do with the burglary, Google still didn't give him his account back. This is what happens when your location history gets pulled into a dragnet. You can end up like Zachary, having to defend yourself and giving up thousands of dollars just to clear your name and not end up in jail. And you're probably thinking, why do I have to fear anything about this? I'm not doing anything illegal. I'm just a good old law-abiding citizen. Zachary wasn't doing anything either, and that's the point. He was following the law and still got caught up in this mess just because he was sharing his location. You don't have to be guilty to be caught up in a system that treats your digital shadow like a piece of evidence. And if this story is freaking you out, that's good, because it should do that. It should cause you to be more self-aware of how you're putting yourself out there and how you're sharing your data with these companies. Because every time we use apps like Google Maps, we're giving up our movements, our patterns, and our presence. And that's an incredibly sensitive piece of information to entrust to a for-profit organization. So here's a tip. If you're on an iPhone, consider switching to Apple Maps. Now, Apple's not perfect as a multi-trillion-dollar company, but they're also not in the business of selling your location to advertisers or turning over your data to law enforcement without a court fight. And if you're on Android, look into some open source or privacy-focused map apps that are out there. A lot of them are free. Try them out, see which one you like, and make sure that privacy is one of the things that they focus on and that they're not selling your movements to advertisers. But even if you're not accused of a crime, you could still be giving up just as much data or maybe even more in your everyday life. So let's take a closer look at the small choices that we make every day that chip away at our privacy without us even knowing. In 2019, the New York Times published an investigation that sent shockwaves through the tech world. They obtained a single file that contained 50 billion location pings from over 12 million smartphone devices. And that's not a typo. I actually meant 50 billion with a B. All kinds of apps, the most random apps you can think of, had this access to location data. And the overwhelming majority of these apps had absolutely no reason to be keeping track of people's locations. Having that amount of data is as close as you can be to being God. The New York Times journalists used this location data to track real people. They didn't use fancy tools, they didn't use facial recognition software, just simple timestamps, GPS coordinates, and some common sense. There was one woman in this investigation who they were able to track from her home in the suburbs to her ex-boyfriend's house and then to her corporate office where she worked at during the week. And there was a man in this same investigation who they were able to track on his way to a job interview. Imagine if your job was able to tell if you were visiting rival employers in the area. That would be a very precarious environment to live in. This wasn't law enforcement. This wasn't the FBI. This was just some journalists who work at the New York Times, and they were able to piece together this information in terrifying detail. And the data that they were using to put together this investigation came from data companies.
What all these companies have in common is they collect your personal information and then resell or share it with others.
So whether it's advertisers or law enforcement, everybody is just jumping on this data and using it to profile people and attract people in some way. So ask yourself, if there's a weather app on your phone, do you have that weather app tracking your precise location? Did you download a PDF scanner app or step counter app, some kind of random app, and forgot about it? All of these apps are making money by harvesting your data and selling it to data brokers. And once it's out there, there's no getting it back. It's already out in the wild. Now, some of you out there might be watching this and thinking, well, what's wrong with me giving up a little bit of my location data to enjoy the convenience of using these apps? And to that I say that it's not just your location data, it's your patterns, your habits, your secrets. It's where you go to worship, where you go to protest, where you go to apply for jobs. All of these things are being compiled to create this terrifyingly detailed picture of yourself. It's like you're out there completely naked and these companies are just having a field day harvesting your digital shadow. It's kind of freaky once you think about it. And it only takes a handful of data points to uniquely identify you from this huge data set of billions of people or billions of data points. And the truth is that you don't have to be rich, you don't have to be famous, you don't have to be powerful for your data to be valuable. Your data is the product and your privacy is what they're selling.
Details tonight on what's being called one of the worst cyber hacks in history, with federal officials revealing they've been investigating China for months after hackers compromised the networks of multiple U.S. communications companies and may still be lurking in the systems of at least some of them.
If you're still using SMS text messages, I strongly encourage you, please update your texting game and start using an encrypted messaging app. My encrypted messaging app of choice is Signal. iMessage is decrypted by default if you're messaging other Apple users who have iMessage, but I like Signal because it is device agnostic. It doesn't matter if you're on an Android or it doesn't matter if you're on an Apple phone. If you have Signal, you can communicate with each other with full encryption. The problem with the old school SMS text messaging is that if you're using this text protocol, you are allowing phone carriers like T-Mobile, AT&T, governments, and even hackers to gain access to your text messages. And to illustrate this, it was recently discovered that there is a criminal organization sponsored by the Chinese government called
Salt Typhoon.
If you haven't heard of Salt Typhoon, now you have. Salt Typhoon managed to gain unauthorized access to sensitive phone records and surveillance systems from mid-2023 to late 2024. The Chinese government used the same surveillance systems installed on all major US phone carriers and are also used by law enforcement. So there's this law, it's called the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, CALEA, and it mandates that all telecommunications providers provide a way for law enforcement to monitor the activity of their clients, their customers. But the problem with this backdoor to monitor and to spy or to snoop on clients is that it also creates a backdoor for illegal actors, for bad actors. So in this case, the Chinese-sponsored threat actor called Salt Typhoon used this same backdoor used by law enforcement to spy on American citizens on American soil. One of the largest data breaches in history. They could see call data, location data, and they actually had call recordings in some instances. And they had access to, you guessed it, SMS text messages. Guess where they didn't have access to messages? Whoever was using iMessage or Signal, these people had their messages protected from Chinese spying efforts. So if you don't want to end up being a target of this criminal organization called
Salt Typhoon.
or if you don't want your phone carrier having a record of all of your call logs and your text messages, and you don't want to end up caught in a law enforcement investigation, start using encrypted messaging apps, all right? I think even the US government is recommending US citizens to start using encrypted messaging apps. So we talked about not using SMS text messages, but what about when you download an app and one of the things they ask you before you start using the app is, would you mind giving us access to your phone contacts? That is a huge privacy failure to do, to allow a corporation or a stranger or a person, whoever it is, to have access to all of your phone contacts. That just sounds insane, but we become desensitized to giving this kind of access for the sake of convenience and bringing ourselves together with our friends and family. You don't have to give up your entire phone contacts just to use a service. If they're insisting on you surrendering your phone contacts, don't use the service. Find something else to use. That's just ludicrous. And one more tip before we move on is that you want to get one more layer of privacy, consider getting a VPN for your phone or your computer, a paid VPN, not a free one, but a paid one. And that will add one more layer of privacy between you and your internet service provider. So these tips that I've given are very fundamental. They're not all comprehensive. This is just something to get you started thinking in this way and to get you started moving in that direction of taking back control of your privacy and taking back control of your data, all right? And I don't want you to think that I'm some sort of privacy expert. You know, I've made mistakes myself in the past. And just last month, I made a mistake with my privacy of my data. But this story starts with me skating in ATL, Georgia. We all been grinding all the time. It ain't nothing on my mind, but we ain't playing with you. So as I was saying, I was visiting Georgia, and one of the main things to do on my to-do list was to make sure I got my butt down to the skating rink. I'm not gonna name this skating rink for reasons that you'll find out in a moment, but I had to drive an hour to get there. And by the time I got there, I was ready to skate, and then boom, it hit me. I had to sign a waiver form, basically saying that if you hurt yourself, the skating rink is not going to carry any liability or responsibility for your injuries. And I'm used to that. But the thing that set this skating rink different or set it apart from the other skating rinks is that they wanted a lot of my personal data, a lot of my personal information. They wanted my full government name, my date of birth, address, my home address, my phone number, my email, and on top of all of that, they wanted a photocopy of my driver's license. Now, here's where I messed up at. So me being in the heat of the moment, I just wanted to skate. I love skating. I got my own pair of skates even, you know, that's how much I love skating. The thing that I failed to do was to remove myself from that situation so that I had time to think and to see it for what it really was. Like, damn, I'm about to give up an awful amount of information just to go skating. And it wasn't until after I had skated that I came back home. It was me and my girlfriend, and she was talking to me, and she was like, hey, I didn't really feel good giving up my information like that to this skating rink. And I'm like, dang, you right. We did give up a lot of information, didn't we? I was like, dang, why did I do that? I guess I just really wanted to skate. And that was eye-opening because it showed me what I was willing to do, what I was willing to give up just for an $18 skate rental. I was willing to give up some very high-value information about myself. That information out there in the wild can cause a lot of headache if it got into the wrong hands. And that was another thing that kind of disturbed me about this location was that I went to their website and I didn't see anything about having my information deleted, and there was virtually little to no way to contact them. The only way I did see to contact them was through their generic info email box to set up private parties. What I did do was not only did I email them, but I also left a Google review and I explained how I enjoyed skating here, but I found it concerning that this skating rink required so much personal information for me. I told them that I plan on contacting them and I hope that they'll get back to me. They haven't gotten back to me. But just today, I went to their website just to check to see if the waiver form is still there or if there was any changes. And lo and behold, they are no longer asking for a photocopy of people's driver's license, which is very good. So I was like, wow, okay. So that just comes to show you that if you speak up, things can happen. But the carnage does not stop there. I messed up again when it comes to protecting my personal data. So the hotel I was staying at, I used Expedia to stay there. And on the day I was checking out of the hotel, the receptionist was like, hey, would you mind giving me your address and your email address and your phone number? And I'm like, dang, here we go again. You know, the first time with the skating rink, I wanted to skate because it was a passion of mine. I love skating. But this time something else was kicking in that caused me to compromise my privacy and my data. And that was, for some reason, not wanting to seem like I was being rude to this person who showed me nothing but good customer service. And I met them halfway. I didn't give them my primary email address. I gave them something else and didn't give them the complete address to my apartment. What I should have done was said, you know, I'm gonna have to pass on that. No thanks, I'd rather not. And just left it at that. You know, and they would have understood where I was coming from, but that's the last time I'll make that mistake. And the thing that's wild about this story is that even though I felt something telling me that this is not a good idea to do, I still did it anyway. And why did I do it? Is because I felt it was the convenient thing to do. Saying no to this person would have been inconvenient and awkward, and I didn't want to experience inconvenience and awkwardness with this stranger who I'd never known my whole life, which doesn't make sense, but when you're in the heat of the moment, stuff like this pops up. And that's the real trap. We give up our privacy because it's easier to give it up than it is to protect it. So let's talk about how big tech is designed to work that way. America's love of convenience can be summed up by the parable of the frog and hot water. In this parable, you got a frog and it's placed in a pot of water on a stove. And the pot is slowly heated up by the flames of the stove. And the frog is completely oblivious that the heat is slowly rising in the pot until it's too late. By the time the frog realizes, it's a second away from dying anyway. The majority of Americans are completely oblivious that we are more and more living in a society of surveillance, specifically surveillance capitalism. This was a term that was coined by this author, Shoshana Zuboff, and she wrote the book called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. And she describes surveillance capitalism as a system where companies profit from collecting, analyzing, and selling your personal data, often without your full awareness or consent.
So, my big point here is that the surveillance capitalists have tried to persuade us that what we are experiencing in their territory, because they now own and operate the internet, what we are experiencing are the inevitable consequences of digital technology. They want us to believe that what they do is the only way we can have a digital future. And my whole point is that surveillance capitalism is an economic logic.
So if you joined me earlier in this episode, I talked about my man Zachary McCoy and how he was falsely accused of a crime he didn't commit just because he was using an app that required Google Maps to operate. That is a perfect example of someone who was simply using something that they felt to be convenient and it landed them in hot water. And the reoccurring theme among all of these apps, or most of these apps, is that they're completely free. And who doesn't like free? I love free. It's a very convenient thing to have, and it's a very powerful thing to have because it just draws you in naturally. But in the digital world, almost everything that's quote unquote free comes with data extraction. These companies lure you in with the free price tag and then sell your whole digital being to these data brokers. And these data brokers in turn take this and sell it to advertisers. And they sometimes turn it over to law enforcement. So there's a high cost when it comes to free and protecting your data and privacy. And the engineers who are paid ridiculous sums of money to design these tools, they design them in a way where you are unaware of what you're giving up. And the currency to get these free services is not money. You're paying with your habits, your movement, your attention, and your face. And if there's one thing that I want you to take away from this podcast episode, it's that it's not just about one piece of data. It's about the aggregate of these data, how they behave when they're combined to create a complete picture of who you are. Your weather app most likely knows what neighborhood you live in and where you go throughout your day. Your go-to ride-sharing app like Uber and Lyft. These apps know where you go to your favorite locations, and they know when you go to them as well. Ridiculously valuable information to have, almost God level. And then what about your search history? If somebody was able to take your search history and comb through it, they could tell you exactly what you're afraid of or what you think about, what keeps you up at night, what keeps you afraid, whether it's your internet service provider, law enforcement, or even foreign governments. So we talked about
Salt Typhoon
and how they're sponsored by the Chinese government to commit espionage and to spy on people abroad and to spy on America's citizens especially. So once you combine all of these data points, these companies who are harvesting this data, they don't even need to know who you are, but just by looking at your data, they can predict what you would do before you even think about doing it yourself, which is just an insane amount of power to have. And we don't have to live like this, spying on ourselves for the profit of multi-trillion-dollar corporations. We could take back control of our privacy with more awareness and better decisions. This process doesn't have to happen overnight. You can start small and let your actions compound on top of each other. Turn off location sharing. Use encrypted apps. Stop sharing your location. Consider using a VPN. And you don't have to be paranoid, living off the grid, wearing a tinfoil hat. All you have to do is just make better digital choices. The same way you lock your front door, you can lock your digital life. If you found this podcast helpful, let me know in the comments and share some of your own tips to protect your privacy in your day-to-day life. And I'll see you all in the next episode.